Poetics. Thanks, everybody. I get to introduce Saretta Morgan. Saretta Morgan is the author of the chapbooks Feeling Upon Arrival from Ugly Duckling Press, 2018, and Room for a Counter Interior, Portable Press at Yo-Yo Labs, 2017, as well as a forthcoming full-length collection, Plan Upon Arrival, from Selva Oscura, 3 Count Pour, 2020. Her work addresses relationships between narrative and physical space. Her most recent writing considers the impact of environmental shifts and natural resource management on Black living. She holds a BA from Columbia University and an MFA from the Pratt Institute and has received fellowships and residencies from the Jerome Foundation, Arizona Commission on the Arts, Headland Center for the Arts, and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, among others. She lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and teaches creative writing at Arizona State University, and she is the inaugural Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, City of Asylum, Dream Space resident. Often in the fall, in particular, I feel hyper-vulnerable, porous, like a sieve, so that everybody else's feelings seem to penetrate my borders, and my own seep out in reckless, unwieldy excretions that impede movement, puddling at my feet. It is a state of overwhelm. Sometimes it is a state of despair. It is also a state of profound empathy, even as it's an empathy that might destroy me. Points in Saretta Morgan's work sometimes feel like a textual rendering of that experience. As she speaks to the erosion of tenuous boundaries between people, I'm reminded that sometimes depression and desire may be rooted in the same human need for connection. As her first person plural speaker remarks in Feeling Upon Arrival, contact dawned in us like poetry, old trauma. We begged questions, responded in gestures, our shins full of glass. And yet the speaking we, also of the forthcoming Plan Upon Arrival, so emphatically plural, is after a particular body, a singular body opening. We desired a particular body, animate breath, wait and now, already the burden of our probable failure. We bent over, sat quietly, or rubbed each other until our gestures became unclear. We gorged on sweet seeds, putrid fruit. Our skin rawed in places, our ankles became sore. But the quest for this singular body is plural, is shared. Its text, a material form of ink on paper, of sentences and fragments deliberately shaped, exists where the bodies merge and separate, where ideas become corporeal. The desire to connect, to erode our boundaries, is simultaneously sensuous and grotesque. Saretta Morgan writes, an appendix washed up near the barn, pages current smoothed, leaning funny. We stood and watched the skin stretched and sewn, the so-called imaginary, so-called interior, so-called paradoxical private sphere. The work of poetry, at least poetry that is shared, is also the work of human connection, of living as we, of eroding the borders between interior and exterior, the private imagination and the public. And sometimes that work is labored and sore and chafing and irritable, and its sentences stick and its smells are putrid, and sometimes that work is lithe and sensual and grasps at its own extraordinary good fortune. Its music, its sex, its tastes, its forms. As she writes, we craved sensuality and other expressions of coherence. Good fucking, James Brown, crumbs from breakfast toast. Please join me in welcoming Saretta Morgan.
Thank you, Lauren. Am I audible right now? People hear me? Okay. Thank you, Lauren, and everyone at City of Asylum. As Lauren mentioned, I'm in the current Dream Space residency, and I just feel so taken care of, and it's been amazing. Lauren, Carla, Lucia, Diane, thank you, everybody. And thank you all for being here, especially considering our current state of emergency, which, I mean, I say that half jokingly, I think. So I moved to Arizona recently, a little over a year ago, and since being there, I've been thinking a lot about kind of what it means to be Black out in the Southwest, and the history of that, and how those narratives have, you know, evolved differently than along the East Coast and the American South, kind of from Texas east, you know, out in Arizona in the borderlands, kind of in relationship to those particular landscapes and markers of cultural significance. And so the first poems that I'm going to read are connected to my thinking about that, and they don't have titles yet, so I'm just going to read a couple of them straight through. Upon freedom, some migrated west for housing and for the mountains which each morning folded orange. In the National Archive, a Negro hauling home water, dust against his throat. One uniformed, his horse mounted by a pinkish white child. Rows of gray houses looking mostly the same, stinking like skin. These impressions are not abstract, yet difficulty marks the door frames, their blackened arrangements of floorboards and iron. Who disposes of the bedpan? One handkerchief with lace. White breaths in the morning in a room where nothing is said. During the classical period, Hohokam peoples traveled land between the 40th and 23rd prime meridians, though these distinctions weren't adopted until 1855. Between what is Utah and Mexico, trailheads thread what has been expelled from the current moment through language. Chainchoya, fruit, and fall. The soil softens, saturated according to rain. A moment extends as far as allowed, as does a story or a river undammed. Each day, the earth begins in England and crawls its shadow west, a term used to color forms and people, even in the dead of morning as chests warm, underwater before facing the light. Light first encounters the Sonoran Desert at Sinaloa, wraps it over the northern Gulf, where life includes endangered horned lizards that can fit in the palm of one's hand. Once plentiful in North America, the species is threatened through predation by domestic dogs and the displacement of compatible prey. Among known understandings of natural life in the United States is the sentence, as in, for the rest of one's natural life, which, unlike the sentence of life, does not imply or otherwise allow for the possibility of parole, which was anyway discontinued within Arizona in 1993, when the possibility of parole was replaced with that of release, a process which remains judicially vague. Today, due to imprecise and/or incorrect language during hearings that occurred after 1994, hundreds of people serve time toward parole hearings that will never exist. Insofar as a sentence is a set of words complete unto itself, every sentence holds its conclusion, its unique termination of a period of time. Soft purple signals the end of night in southern Arizona, against which cliffed mountains silhouette into view. Wood frogs retreat in the depth of winter. Their bodies appear lifeless, as do gall moths, which avoid internal freezing by emptying their guts. The oldest public record of Black death in the state of Arizona regards an unidentified male lost to exposure. Depending on the year, the skin may have remained, though thin, found in dry orchards out of season among cotton, saguaro picked by birds. Exposure is also the revelation of an identity or fact, state of being exposed to contact with something else, even when making very little noise. The brutality of thick air and money, mythos and disgust for what is fleshy yet unuseful. Of the raw resources necessary to maintain human life, which may be commodified, water distinguishes itself through ease of portability. Along the edge of Pinal County, immigrants discard what they no longer need, and or what might identify them as such. Shoes the texture of sea anemones, black bottles to hold water without reflecting light. Someone placed a child's weathered skull at the base of a cairn in order to be seen. From the National Archive, African American cavalry enter a corral. In Fort Huachuca, the sun burns highlights onto the buttocks of their mounts. Corrugated steel. Shadows stark against sand. Negative number 501 awaits rebirth through silver and light. The hands of an archivist, tired stains beneath his nails. Projection takes many forms. Some, too dense to exit the mind, gestate through organs. Groaning, heavy with yellowed phlegm. Chosen for its hills and perennial stream, Huachuca was controlled against Geronimo until 1886, when inflammation took his lungs. It reemerged as leader in electronic warfare and combat surveillance in 1954. Through this and now, the sycamore shade yucca. Violet-crowned hummingbirds share sky islands with the lesser long-nosed bat, each protected by a research conservancy and the U.S. Army's Management Command. The projections also recede. A rose-bellied trogon returns to his copper eye. Woodhead mammal, beaten wildly, flesh ragged. The horse, too, continues backward, splendid abscess claiming its mouth. Within the field of topology, two objects are felt identical in shape according to the degree by which each shifts without being punctured or erased. This information has no meaning to a body deformed by thirst, though meaning continues to carry. One example is that of rope, which knots regardless of century or scale, or silence whose density curls into the teeth of every mouth struck ajar. Whereas oppression may be a question of mobility, erasure is necessarily one of form. Skin resists being broken. Burns discolor a neck unwilling yet obedient. That which in the evening is severed defines new uses for flesh. And that's all of those poems. Thank you. So the second project I'm going to read from is my forthcoming book manuscript called Plan Upon Arrival, as Lauren said. And my family has a farm in the Panhandle in Florida, and this project is me kind of thinking through all the languages that one needs to consider that space in terms of the very large presence of a federal correctional facility that's now there, the history of Black farming, and their kind of dispossession through USDA policies, and indigenous disposition, and Black violence, and also just for me the language that I need to exist with my family as someone who's not from Florida, is from up north, and not Pentecostal either. Also, I want to say the manuscript has images in it, which I am not going to show, but I am going to read the captions. Plan upon arrival. An appendix washed up near the barn. Pages current smoothed, leaning funny. We stood and watched the skin stretched and sewn. The so-called imaginary, so-called interior, so-called paradoxical private sphere. We wanted to tell us something, but what and how was being said, wrung out and hanging. Geography is not, however, secure and unmoving. We produce space in its meaning. McKittrick, Relief on Paper, Saretta Morgan, 2018. We desired a particular body, animate breath, weight, and now, already the burden, our probable failure. We bent over, sat quietly, or rubbed each other until our gestures became unclear. We gorged on sweet seeds, putrid fruit. Our skin rawed in places, our ankles became sore. The point was artful enclosure, preparation for the appearance of what couldn't arrive, dimming one room to foreign language for others. The plan depended on who you asked and the time of day. A pale light loomed on the porch, one burnt out or flickering, glass busted, illuminated by a fire. Typical. We stayed trying to go home, then were mad when we got there. Sound, texture, the relative temperature of a thumb exiting a mouth to that of a mouth unwilling. Flesh and water some days meant nothing, or else we held our knees. We sat for bread, the plan folded into apertures, after images softening the point only and always directly behind the future, which meant there was a future. The chronology was unclear. There were narratives of movement, narratives of material, and the two held together like an ill-fitted sheet. It was impossible, we were sure, that sites of violence could be evacuated of material composition. If we forgot, there were our shoulders, chafed in the morning. I want to be swallowed by another language. Green. Relief on Paper. Saretta Morgan, 2018. As a professional field, geography diminished us, yet was the only way to make it through the hour, to run a decent salt bath, squeeze and purchase fruit, to hover by the door as if that were an accomplishment and not abuse of our thighs. We harbored similar questions. The lover, someone repeated with their mouth full of food, is without fail the one who waits. Each point represented a grid, an indexing plane of corporeal oppositions, from which to enter a room, become a condition that might change. We vaguely understood the capacity of a map to make locations appear remote, increase orders of tangibility, to question and denaturalize documentation, inhabit a face, image longing, though unaware of what we were doing. However useful, the language was degrading, incompatible, and lacked necessary verbs. We was, we were, had come back, were gonna, or going to be. When anyone got tired, we brought out folding chairs. No one understood the plan, its light shape, why the thought at times rivaled specifically the memory of punch bowl cake, or Turkish delight, depending on childhood reference. Queer conservative, naughty, half-realized an intellectualism that impeded fucking but was of sexual nature nonetheless. Possibility, like softness, exercised itself in ability to compress, overflow, and alter the landscape through a low swollen hum, to smell strongly in the morning, at the grocery, or over the phone. Every first Sunday, church without a drum kit, each note crumbled from our mouths, illegible with sweat. Conversations went to love, how to structure life and resources so as to invite others in, to recognize subtle narrative forms, to fix one's credit. The plan, nonlinear, occurred always all at once. A heifer gave birth in the field, then died. The next year, another cause we didn't understand. This time back near the woods, flies covered her face and shit laid out from her ass. Down a road and through a bend, some trees in there. A gentleman at the pond, another running through the fields. There were moments we were incapable of decision, an opening through which to register an image, pungent through its own material law. A body pulled inward, door unlocked, irresponsible to. That this moment would return us, that this and only this would be the day. What conditions surround intimacy? Spillers, relief on paper, Saretta Morgan, 2018. Relief on paper, Saretta Morgan, 2018. We buried our hands at dawn, the cows glowing powder blue in the beginnings of light, tits hard, swollen for touch. Looking out over the sink or the yard to where the lines hung, we could be anyone, which is why we came back, why we stayed could only rarely return. We repositories cracking at the sight of water, unthinking, alternately braided and dispersed, refusing pain, welcoming pain and refusing to comb our hair. The objecting was audible, object in space, annotations of effective frequency, transcriptions of the double clap, conceptual scores and the results according to those who took notes. We measured time on the backs of our thighs, scraped for language to arrange what was to what was rendered, unrendered, unrenderable. It shifted, our hands on one another, blue on November. We lotioned our heels, hoping we wouldn't have to prove we'd become who we were waiting for. A smooth tricep reached across a lily blouse, a blouse open. We demanded spatial inquiry, touched our fingers to our veins, took in the smell of the seats, quietly, hoping no one would see. Someone left to buy cowpeas, pay the light bill. Dailiness was the anxiety through which we waited. Buttons undone, like clearance. Not what we wanted, but what we didn't know we had to have. Private acts to attempt in public. Productive relationships to sites of violence. Lace fronts. $1 to run to the store. The plan deviated, overlapped, came to a point that was in that and was speaking. Along the road, signs for honey and jarred figs. We stuck our fingers in the periphery, waiting to be fed, then split open. Chosen. Letters arrived in intervals. As with everything else, one might come, one might not, regardless of whether there'd been a response. We prepared at all times, held our mouths. We dreamed things would be different. Every time a door opened, we each smiled in a way to make clear we'd never seen our own face. Thank you.
Thank you, Saretta. And if you want to catch her again, she's co-facilitating a workshop February 25th with Bekezela Maguni in the Hillman Library at Pitt. So you can find out about that at the CAAPP website, CAAPP.pitt.edu. Ross Gay is the author of 3 books, Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, and Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, winner of the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. Catalog was also a finalist for the 2015 National Book Award for Poetry, the Ohayana Book Award, the Balkanist Poetry Prize, and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and it was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. Ross is a founding board member of the Bloomington Community Orchard, a nonprofit free fruit for all food justice and joy project. He has received fellowships from Cave Canem, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation. He teaches at Indiana University. Being something of a cynic, I was skeptical when I saw the title of a book of delights, though I should not have been, following Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, where the short line poems propel a kind of nuanced thinking/feeling where gratitude can merge with grief. The bold titles of both books make me think of The Triggering Town, where Richard Hugo warns poets like me who live in fear of appearing sentimental that if you are not risking sentimentality, you are not close to your inner self. And to be close to your inner self, you must also be close to your physical self. One of the many delights chronicled in the Book of Delights is that of writing by hand. The actual magic writing is, which comes from our bodies, which we actually think with, quiet as it's kept, Ross Gay writes. The writing itself is an enactment of another of the author's delights, loitering, arresting one's time from the assumed owners of it, who are not you, back to the rightful, who is. This loitering, this slowing down and focusing in that a writer can only really do in longhand, whether remarking on the bumbling choreography of a hug or noting that, and I have to do the air quotes for this, a friend's air quotes are unabashed, two-handed, two-fingered, punctuative dances during which often he will lean back or put a hip out like he's setting a hula hoop into motion. Among my great delights in this book are Gay's marvelous, spot-on but surprising images. The hyphen is the handshake of the punctuation world. The sight of a handwritten ID tag on a bag truly filled my heart with flamingos or turned my heart into a flamingo. Loitering in prose also creates a space for associative leaps. No, not leaps, more like associative meanders, so that delight can very quickly bleed into a fraught or violent or desperate space from which it cannot ultimately be separated. Like the act of writing by hand, delight is inextricably tied to the body and therefore to mortality. Ross Gay writes, "It astonishes me sometimes, no often, how every person I get to know, everyone, regardless of everything, by which I mean everything, lives with some profound personal sorrow." He goes on, "Not to mention the existential sorrow we might all be afflicted with, which is that we and what we love will soon be annihilated." I'm reminded of our own Toy Derricott's assertion that joy is an act of resistance. For, as Ross writes, one of the objectives of popular culture, popular media, is to make Blackness appear to be inextricable from suffering and suffering from Blackness. And yet, and still, as Ross Gay writes, you have been reading a book of delights written by a Black person, a book of Black delight, daily as air. It is my great delight to welcome Ross Gay.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And that reading was beautiful. Yeah. It's good to be here. I am going to read. I'm glad you acknowledged, like, it could be a cloying title, like, oh, fuck your delight. But I'm glad you came around. I'm going to read a handful of these things, and I'm really so glad to be here. You know, I lived here for a semester in 2005. I taught at Pitt, and I love this city, and just being around here just makes me so happy. And as it turns out, I have some dear friends who live here too, and twins and such. This is called My birthday, kinda. It's the first one. So the deal of the book, let me just tell you, is that one day I decided I was having something delightful was happening. I was like, oh, that'd be fun to write about, a little essay about this delightful thing. And then I thought it would be really delightful. No, it'd be really interesting to write an essay about something that delighted me every day for a year. That's what this book is, not 365 of them. So this is the first one. My birthday, kinda. I did it from birthday to birthday. My birthday, kinda. It's my 42nd birthday, and it would make perfect, if self-involved, sense to declare the day of my birth a delight, despite the many years I've almost puritanically paid no attention to it. A sad performance of a certain masculine nonchalance, non-flamboyance, might have been, poor thing. Now it's all I can do not to bedeck myself in every floral thing imaginable. Today, both earrings and socks. Oh, and my drawers, hibiscus patterned with the codling pocket in front to boot. And if there's some chance to wear some bright and clanging colors, believe me, some bit of healing for my old man, surely, who would warn us against wearing red, lest we succumb to some stereotype I barely even know. A delight that we can heal our loved ones, even the dead ones. Oh, broken. Oh, beautiful. So let me first say, yes, mostly, the day of my birth is an utter and unmitigated delight. And not only for the very sweet notes I sometimes get that day, already 5 by 8:15 a.m. from Taiwan, the Basque Country, Palo Alto, Bloomington, and Frenchtown, New Jersey, but also for the actual miracle of a birth, not just the beautifully zany and alien and wet and odorous procedure that is called procreation, but for the many thousand, million accidents, no impossibilities leading to our births. For God's sake, my white mother never even met a black guy. My father failed out of Central State, too busy looking good and having fun, so they say. Got drafted and was counseled by his old man to enlist in the Navy that day so as not to go where the black and brown and poor kids go in the wars of America. And they ended up, I kid you not, in Guam. Black man, white woman, the year of loving versus Virginia, on a stolen island in the Pacific, a staging ground for American expansion and domination. Come some babies, one of them me. Anyway, you get it. The older I get, in all likelihood closer to my death than to my birth, despite all the arugula and quinoa, the more I think of this day as a delight. But that's not today what I want to land on, if only because one's birthday is also the day of hollering many delights, if you can muster them, which today I can. This morning I was walking through Manhattan, head down, checking directions. You know, I lost my phone like 3 days ago, left it in a cab. So now I haven't had my head down asking for directions. I've had my head up, asking people for directions. My life is 10 times better. This morning I was walking through Manhattan, head down, checking directions, when I looked up to see a fruit truck selling lychee, 2 pounds for $5, and I had $10 in my pocket. Then while buying my bus ticket for later that evening, I witnessed the Transbridge teller's face soften after she'd endured a couple unusually rude interactions in front of me as I kept eye contact and thanked her. She called me honey first, delight, baby second, delight, and almost smiled before I turned away. On my way to the Flatiron building, there was an aisle of Coosa dogwood, looking parched, but still, the prickly knobs of fruit nestled beneath the leaves. A cup of coffee from a well-shaped cup. A fly, its wings hauling all the light in the room, landing on the porcelain handle as if to say, notice the precise flare of this handle, as though designed for the romance between the thumb and index finger that holding a cup can be. Or the peanut butter salty enough. Or the light blue bike the man pushed through the lobby. Or the top knot of the barista. Or the sweet glance of the man in his stylish short pants, well-lotioned ankles gleaming beneath, walking 2 little dogs. Or the woman stepping in and out of her shoe, her foot curling up and stretching out and curling up. This next one is called, hey, thank you. This next one is called The High Five from Strangers, Etc. Today I was wandering the square of the small Indiana town where I gave a poetry reading at the local college. A feature of the small town Midwest, a city hallish building in the center, always with some sad statue trumpeting one war or another. This one had a guy in one of those not very protective looking hats they called a helmet during World War I. He's carrying, naturally, a gun. Jenna Osman's book, Public Figures, alerted me to the ubiquity of the gun, the weapon, in the hands of our statues. A delight I wish to now imagine and even impose, given that beneficent dictatorship of one's own life anyway, is a delight. All new statues must have in their hands flowers, or shovels, or babies, or seedlings, or chinchillas. We could go on like this for a while. But never again, never ever, guns. I decree it. I decree it, and also decree the removal of the already extant guns. Let the emptiness our war heroes carry be the metaphor for a while. As I was finishing circling the square, I passed a storefront garage with huge Make America Great Again signs. It was a foreign auto repair shop, and inside were mostly Toyotas and Hondas. I settled into the coffee shop, where it seemed every other black person in this town was also hiding. Every one of them offering me some discreet version of the greeting. Took my notebooks out and was reading over these delights, transcribing them into my computer. And while I was working, headphones on, swaying to the new De La Soul record, Delight, which deserves its own entry, I noticed a white girl. She looked 15, but could have been, I suppose, a college student, standing next to me with her hand raised. I looked up, confused, pulled my headphones back, and she said, like a coach or something, "Working on your paper? Good job to you, high five." And you better believe I high-fived that child in her pre-ripped Def Leppard shirt and her itty-bitty Doc Martens. For I delight in unequivocally pleasant public physical interactions with strangers. What constitutes pleasant, it's no secret, is informed by my largish male and cisgender body, a body that is also largish male, cisgender, and not white. In other words, the pleasant, the delightful are not universal. We should all know that by now. A few months ago, walking down the street in Umbertide in Italy, a trash truck pulled up beside me, and the guy in the passenger seat yelled something I didn't understand. I said, "Como?" The Spanish word for come again, which is a ridiculous thing to say because even if he had come again, I would not have understood him. He knew this, and hopping out of the truck to dump in a couple cans, he flexed his muscles, pointed at me, smacked my biceps hard, twice. I loved him. Or when a waitress puts her hand on my shoulder, or someone scooting by puts their hand on my back. The handshake, the hug, I love them both. Once I was getting on a plane, and shuffling down the aisle, I saw, sitting at the front of coach, reading a magazine, my great Uncle Earl. I got down on my knees and put my hand on his forearm and said, "Uncle Earl, it's me, Ross." He looked at me kind of quizzically, as did the woman traveling with him who did not look one bit like my Aunt Sylvia, which made me look back at my not Uncle Earl, who looked maybe like my Uncle Earl's second cousin 20 years ago. And though it was benign and no one was hurt, it was a little weird. And they looked confused. All the same, given his Uncle Earl died about 6 months later, I'm delighted I got to see him and touch him gently, lovingly, about 1,000 miles away. Thank you. This is called Hole in the Head. I love weird vernacular sayings that roll off the tongue and most likely have an interesting lineage, etymology, history. I can't think of one right now, but you know what I mean. Oh, here's one. I need X like I need a hole in my head. This means I do not need X. I need to be fired like I need a hole in my head. I need this cancer to resurface like I need a hole in my head. I need my kid to get back on heroin like I need a hole in my head. Interesting, sad, I mean, that usage of the simile often implies that a hole in the head administered by oneself might be a reasonable response. I'm thinking of that phrase because there's a recently released documentary called Hole in the Head about Vertus Hardiman, a man who grew up in Lyles Station in southern Indiana, about 90 miles from where I'm writing this. Lyles Station was a town established by free blacks in the 1800s. It's charming. I went there for a celebration day a few years back, paper plates of corn on the cob and baked beans and barbecue. We moseyed through the town museum and talked to locals. I learned today, watching the trailer for that documentary, and with some subsequent online research, that when Hardiman was a boy in the 1920s, he was one of a group of little children, little test subjects, upon whom radiation experiments were performed. The experiments exposed these little children, little test subjects, to severe levels of radiation, such that for little 5-year-old Hardiman, it burned a hole in his head. It might sound harsh to say it, but good Lord, black people, never let an official-looking white person dressed in a white lab coat experiment on you or your children. Good Lord. If you're like me, you're picturing a scalp wound, like a cigarette or cigar burn, maybe a peppering of them. You might even picture a patch of bald skin where the hair refuses to grow. Don't picture that. Picture a fist-sized crevice in his skull, flesh and fat glistening as he removes the sock hat and bandages beneath, all the surrounding skin charred pink and gray. I'm trying to remember the last time I haven't been reminded of the inconceivable violence black people have endured in this country. When talking to my friend Kia about struggling with paranoia, she said, "You'd have to be crazy not to be paranoid as a black person in this country. Crazy not to think they want to put a hole in your head." Loitering. I'm sitting at a cafe in Detroit where in the door window is the sign with the commands, "No soliciting, no loitering," stacked like an anvil. I have a fiscal relationship with this establishment, which I developed by buying a coffee, and which makes me a patron. And so even though I subtly dozed in the late afternoon sun pouring under the awning, the $2 spent protects me, at least temporarily, from the designation of loiterer, though the dozing, if done long enough, or ostentatiously enough, or with enough delight, might transgress me over. Loitering, as you know, means fucking off, or doing jack shit, or jacking off. And given that 2 of those 3 terms have sexual connotations, it's no great imaginative leap to know that it is a repressed and repressive sexual and otherwise culture, at least, that invented and criminalized the concept. Someone reading this might very well keel over considering loitering a concept and not a fact. Such are the gales of delight. The Webster's definition of loiter reads thus: to stand or wait around idly without apparent purpose, and to travel indolently with frequent pauses. Among the synonyms for this behavior are linger, loaf, laze, lounge, lollygag, dawdle, amble, saunter, meander, putter, dilly-dally, and mosey. Any one of these words in the wrong frame of mind might be considered critique or noun epithet, lollygagger or loafer. Indeed, lollygag was one of the words my mom would use to cajole us while jingling her keys when she was waiting on us, which, judging from the visceral response I had while writing that memory, must have been not quite infrequent. All of these words to me imply having a nice day. They imply having the best day. They also imply being unproductive, which leads to being if only temporarily, non-consumptive. And this is a crime in America, and more explicitly criminal depending upon any number of quickly apprehended visual cues. For instance, the darker your skin, the more likely you are to be loitering, though a Patagonia jacket could do some work to disrupt that perception. A Patagonia jacket, colorful pants, tree-torn sneakers with short socks, an Ivy League ball cap, and a thick book, not the Bible, and you're almost golden. Almost. There is a Venn diagram someone might design, several of them, that will make visual our constant internal negotiation towards safety. And like the best comedy, it will make us laugh hard before saying, Lord. It occurs to me that laughter and loitering are kissing cousins, as both bespeak an interruption of production and consumption. And it's probably for this reason that I have been among groups of non-white people laughing hard who have been shushed in a Qdoba in Bloomington, in a bar in Fishtown, in the Harvard Club at Harvard. The shushing, perhaps, reminds how threatening to the order are our bodies in non-productive, non-consumptive delight. The moment of laughter not only makes consumption impossible, you might choke. But if the laugh is hard enough, if the shit talk is just right, food or drink might fly from your mouth. If not, and this hurts, your nose. And if your body is supposed to be one of the consumables, if it has been, if it is, one of the consumables around which so many ideas of production and consumption have been structured in this country, well, there you go. There is a Carrie Mae Weems photograph of a woman in what looks to be some kind of textile factory with an angel embroidered to the left breast of her shirt where her heart resides. The woman, like the angel, has her arms splayed wide almost in ecstasy, as though to embrace everything. So in the midst of her glee is she. Every time I see that photo, after I smile and have a genuine bodily opening on account of witnessing this delight, which is a moment of black delight, I look behind her for the boss. Uh-oh, I think, you're in a moment of non-productive delight, heads up. Which points to another of the synonyms for loitering, which I almost wrote as delight, taking one's time. For while the previous list of synonyms allude to time, taking one's time makes it kind of plain. For the crime of loitering, the idea of it is about ownership of one's own time, which must be sometimes wrested from the assumed owners of it, who are not you, back to the rightful, who is. And while having interpolated the policing of delight such that I am on the lookout for the overseer, even in photos I have studied hundreds of times, on the lookout always for the policer of delight. My work is studying this kind of glee, being on the lookout for it, and aspiring to it, floating away from the factory, as she seems to be. I made the mistake of not bringing a clock up here. What do I have, about 45 minutes left? Like 5 minutes? Okay, thanks. Okay. Cool. Okay, I'm going to read 2 more of these. Thank you for listening and being here. It's so lovely to be with you all. This one is called The Marfa Lights. My buddy Pat and I went to shoot around at the courts here in Marfa today. We were warming up, shooting 12-footers and doing slow spin moves and crossovers when a young guy from the other side of the basketball court swaggered toward us, holding a ball on his hip, the light gleaming in his earrings, and challenged us to a 2-on-2, pointing his thumb to himself and back to his buddy, draining threes from the corner. We agreed and went on to kick the shit out of them, 21-0. That's a horrible figure of speech, and I leave it in only to expose the violence we so easily say. We got more baskets than they did. That they were only 12 years old is irrelevant. given as this was their home court. And they even had a crowd watching. Another little girl who, when one of the kids shouted to the gods, "They're kicking our butts," said, "I hope so." They're grown men. When that was going on, like, Pat actually stopped me, like when we were checking the ball up or something. He was like, "Maybe let him score." Fuck that. No way. They challenged us. This is called Cocoa Baby. I caught sight of myself this morning, and this is the last one I'm going to read. I caught sight of myself this morning in the mirror applying coconut oil to my body. I was bent over with one foot on the edge of the tub, rubbing the oil into my calves, which have become a particularly ashen part of my body, particularly visibly ashen as it's summer, which I'm trying to address with a loofah and the oil abundantly applied. If you want to get way further into this, and I think you do, I recommend Simone White's essay, Lotion, in her book of Being Dispersed. This time of year, I am mostly brown, except for the stretch from my waist to my mid-thighs, which is a lighter shade, neither of them to be compared to a food or coffee drink. With my leg up like this, bent over, my testicles swaying just beneath my pale thigh, I wondered if, whenever I am in this position, which is often, oiling, cutting toenails, I will always think of Toy Derricott's poem in The Undertaker's Daughter, where as a child she walks in on her abusive father standing more or less just like this, though he's shaving. Seeing his testicles dangling like that, she thinks they're his udders. She writes, "The female part he hid, something soft and unprotected I shouldn't see." I watched myself rub the oil liberally on my body while I was still wet, which my dear friend recently taught me keep some of the moisture in. I got my calves, then my feet, lacing my fingers into my toes. When doing this, I often recall another friend who, watching me put lotion on my feet one day, smiled and said, "Good job." Up to my thighs, inner and outer, around to my ass, which seems to want to break out some when I'm sitting too much. Then I get both arms and shoulders, my chest and stomach, and what I can reach of my back. Usually I oil my face with the residual oil on my hands and finish by oiling my penis. Not always last, but often, which I wouldn't read too much into one way or the other. Today when I watched myself, particularly when I was oiling my chest and stomach, which I do kind of by self-hugging, I was thinking, how many bodies of mine are in this body? This nearly 43-year-old body stationed on this plane for the briefest. I could see, as I always can, probably kind of dysmorphically, my biggest body, when it was 260 pounds and a battering ram and felt sort of impervious. I could also see my 12-year-old self, chubby and gangly and ashamed. And of course the baby me, who I don't remember being, though I have seen pictures. When you watch yourself in the mirror oiling yourself like this, wrapping your arms around yourself, jostling yourself a little, it is easy or easier to see yourself as a child, and maybe even a child you really love. It is easy, if you decide it, which might be hard, to let the oiling be of the baby you. Or at least I thought so today, looking at myself, whom I am so often not nice to. But the baby you oil until he shines. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, thank you both for being here and reading. My question is, your manuscript, you incorporated images, figures, and when you mentioned that, I wasn't sure what that would mean, and it seemed it's your own artwork. I'm just wondering how you approach putting together a work, if it's you view your images as illustrative, or if it's sort of a back and forth where the artwork communicates with your words, or kind of what your approach is for that and how that works.
They do happen at the same time. I don't think there's necessarily a relationship between what I'm writing and the images, but it does help me. They're prints, so it's a long process, mixing ink, carving plates, and just the repetitiveness of all of those processes are really helpful when I have writing in the back of my mind. I think in terms of integrating them with the text after they're made, I do the captions for them are very specific to the image in terms of the quote that I use. They're all quotes from Black women, artists, and intellectuals. And so that part feels like in more direct conversation with the text. And also the text is completely in the first person plural. And so it kind of gives me an opportunity to bring in, to point to particular voices that wouldn't otherwise be compatible with the perspective from which I'm writing.
Hi, I think the audience might be interested in hearing about your orchard and how it's doing and how it came to be.
Yeah. The orchard is doing well. It's like 10 years old almost. I think we planted it in 2010. And, you know, the way it came to be is actually this woman in town, Amy Countryman, she did like a thesis project about food security and stuff like that. And one of her sort of interventions into how Bloomington might sort of take care of itself in that way, one of the many things it might do is to think about urban orchards. So that's what she researched and she proposed, and her advisor suggested she take it to the urban forester. The urban forester said, that's a great idea if you can get support, blah, 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 blah. She got support. 6 months later, we planted an orchard. Maybe it was 8 months later, we planted an orchard. And it's doing really well, you know, and it's been very interesting to sort of watch it evolve because it's, you know, it's an acre orchard, you know. So in terms of like the production, it's not like a, you know, but, I mean, it's awesome, but you know, it's not like you don't make a big dent with 1 acre. You make a dent with like a lot of sort of things. But the dent that we make is that we have all of these classes all the time. So there are, I mean, we've probably had 1,000 people come through learning how to sort of garden or tend their orchard or grow things. So that's one dent that we do make. And the other dent is that we are a place that is sort of intentionally, it's a place that is intentionally sort of designed and built by community, the investigation, the deep and abiding investigation of what it means to be a good neighbor. So it's like this place of study, you know, which to me is like the real miracle of the place, you know. You know, the strawberries are doing really good, you know, like some years the apples are great, you know, they get worms, you got eat around the worms, okay. So, but yeah, thank you for that question.
Hi, Ross. Just a question about the discipline in writing about, for the book of, the book of discipline, writing 365 days for the year, and how that kind of, did you have a strategy going into it, or?
Yeah, you know, the one strategy was like to forgive myself by the 4th day when I fucked up and didn't do it. So that was like first strategy. And the second strategy was to, you know, I timed myself. I drafted everything in a half hour. So it was like, you know, you're not gonna be making great essays here necessarily. Like, just draft something. So that was actually, those were 2 of the main strategies, you know, so it didn't have to be like a production. It was just like, get down to it. And when you don't do it, like, just do it the next day or the next day. Yeah, good question.
I don't need a microphone. I hate them. I was here last week when
We'll repeat.
Maybe just use it in case there are people in the audience who have a hard time hearing. Yes, can you talk into the mic?
He was here. He mentioned you. A month ago, I hadn't heard of either one of you. I'm an old guy. Of course, I know most of them are dead now. But I'm glad I came out, challenged myself. Here, you guys. Both of you are very eloquent. Both of you also, two things. You actually talk to people through your work, and there's a sense of humor. How did you determine, how did that gangly kid decide to become a writer?
So he was acknowledging that we try to talk to an audience, and the question was how does the gangly kid decide to become a writer? I became a writer, I mean, there's probably several things that happened, but one of the things is that I actually had a professor who said you should read Amiri Baraka, give a presentation on Amiri Baraka, and then I started reading, and it kind of changed my life. Other things happened too. I met very important people who were also sort of trying to figure stuff out, and probably other books were coming into my life. But it was a little bit a teacher who was like, do some. How about you?
I started writing poems. I had an internship and then a short job at a poetry organization called CAAPP, and I fell in love with poets. And I was like, these are my people. But then I actually had to start writing poets so that I could hang out with them and not feel like a fraud. So yeah, I think it's I learned that I really loved being in relationships where language was constantly being built, and that I found that to be a really beautiful form of intimacy. And so yeah, I think that the practice of language with other people is what drove me to writing poetry.
Okay, one more question, and it's over here. Hi, Ross. Thank you. I'm here. Can you tell us more about the context of your poem on the fig tree in Philadelphia?
You just want me to tell you about the poem more?
Yeah, I love that poem so much, and I just want to kind of envision a bit more the context, the setting in which you just came across this fig tree.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like, I'm glad you asked that, because sometimes I explain what happened, and then I'm like, oh, I'm ruining the poem. Maybe I'm not. I was like, what? So this is a poem called To the Fig Tree on 9th and Christian that she's referencing, and it's just this poem that describes this interaction, this gathering that happened around this fig tree that was on, actually it's between 9th and 10th, someone's corrected me, and Christian Street in Philadelphia. I was just walking down the street, and it's right across from one of my favorite places to eat in Philly called Sabrina's, this diner. And there were 10 people hanging out beneath this tree. And there was this woman sweeping up the street, sweeping up figs off the sidewalk. And literally she said, because if someone falls, we'll get in trouble. I mean, it was that many figs, and it was a tree in, Philadelphia. I know there's fig trees in Philadelphia, but I didn't quite know it until I saw this. And it was like a 25-foot tree. And there was all of this community happening on account of this tree growing next to this building on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most, which has murdered its own people, And that's sort of what, it occurred to me after, wow, that's one of the zillion magical things that's probably happening in the city right now, So that's kind of what it was.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you so much to Lauren, Saretta, and Ross. We have a very small token appreciation t-shirt. Yeah, thank you so much.